It was a quiet afternoon in the city, the kind of day where people were rushing in and out of tall glass buildings, each carrying their own world of worries and hopes. Inside one of those tall buildings was a luxury store. The store was known for its glittering collection of watches, the kind most people only saw in magazines or on the wrists of millionaires and movie stars. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and new leather. The lights above shone on the glass displays, making the watches sparkle like treasures in a hidden cave. For the people who worked there, it was a place of pride, but for most customers who walked by outside, it was a dream just to look through the window. That afternoon, a man entered the store. He wore simple clothes, jeans, a plain shirt, and a jacket that had clearly been worn many times. His hair was slightly messy, and he carried himself in a quiet way. The employees noticed him, but no one rushed over immediately. In luxury stores, they often judged customers by their appearance, and this man did not look like the kind of person who could buy anything from there. But one young employee, who was new to the job, decided to walk over anyway. He had been taught to treat every person kindly, no matter what they looked like. He put on his warmest smile and greeted the man. "Good afternoon, sir. Is there anything I can show you today?" The man returned the smile, though his was softer, almost shy. His voice was calm when he replied, "Just looking, thank you." The employee nodded and walked beside him as he moved from one glass display to another. The man paused often, his eyes lingering on the watches, as though he was not only seeing the designs but also imagining the stories behind them. Each watch carried a price that could cover months of rent or a family's yearly expenses. The employee couldn't help but feel curious. Customers who came into the store usually behaved differently. Some were arrogant, some hurried, and some wanted to show off their wealth. But this man seemed different. He looked at the watches with quiet respect, not greed, not pride. There was something almost gentle about him. They stopped at one particular display. Inside lay a rare watch, its silver frame reflecting the light, its face crafted with delicate detail. It was the kind of watch collectors dreamed of owning, the kind that would never lose its value. The man leaned closer, studying it with interest. The employee, wanting to be helpful, explained, "This piece is one of our finest. It's handmade and has a long history behind its design. Many people admire it, but very few can afford it." He gave a small laugh, adding, "Even I, working here, could never dream of owning something like this." The word slipped out before he realized how honest he had been. He usually kept conversations professional, but standing there with this man, he felt safe enough to admit it. There was no judgment in the man's eyes, no sign that he looked down on him for saying such a thing. The man turned his head slowly, his eyes thoughtful. He didn't say anything right away. Instead, he looked at the employee, as though trying to understand more about him, his story, his struggles, his life outside the polished floor and shining glass. The employee felt a little nervous under his gaze but also strangely comfortable. He found himself explaining more than he normally would. He spoke about how he had been working in the store for almost a year, how he admired the beautiful pieces he handled every day, but how far away they felt from his own reality. "It's funny," he said with a half smile, "I spend my days showing people treasures that I could never own myself." The man listened carefully, nodding slowly, as if every word mattered. Most people would have brushed off such a comment, but he didn't. He stood there quietly, his expression calm but serious, like someone who carried empathy in his heart. Outside the store, people passed by without noticing the moment happening inside. Cars honked, voices mixed in the city's endless rhythm, but here in the quiet store, it felt like time had slowed. The employee thought perhaps he had spoken too much, but then the man broke the silence with a small smile. "It must be hard," he said gently, "to see these things every day, knowing they're out of reach. But you still take care of them, and you explain them with such pride." The words touched the employee more than he expected. Few customers ever noticed the effort he put into his work. To hear it from this man, who seemed so ordinary yet spoke with such kindness, felt different. What the employee did not know yet was that the man standing before him was none other than Keanu Reeves. The world-famous actor, known not only for his roles but also for his humility and kindness, was right there in front of him. But in that moment, he was not a star, not a celebrity, not someone untouchable. He was just a man listening to another man, seeing him not as an employee but as a person. The employee had no idea who he was speaking to, and perhaps that was what made the moment pure. There were no masks, no pretenses, only an honest conversation between two strangers brought together by chance. Keanu's eyes returned to the watch in the display, but his thoughts were far from its glittering surface. He was thinking about the young man beside him, about his honesty, his struggle, and the quiet truth he had just shared. He was thinking about how many people in the world worked hard every day, giving their best, yet still could not afford even a fraction of the luxuries they helped others enjoy. The store remained calm, the lights steady, the glass cases gleaming. To anyone else walking in, it was just another afternoon in a luxury store. But to the young employee and the man standing beside him, something deeper was unfolding. It was the beginning of a story neither of them would forget, a story that would soon show how a single moment of kindness and honesty could change everything. The man and the young employee continued walking slowly through the quiet store. The sound of their footsteps on the polished floor echoed gently, while the soft hum of the lights filled the silence between their words. The man's gaze kept returning to the rare watch, the one the employee had admitted he could never afford. There was something in his expression, not of greed or desire, but of reflection, as if the watch carried more meaning than its shining metal and fine design. The employee noticed this but tried to remain professional. Yet deep inside, he felt a strange connection with this customer. Perhaps it was the way the man listened so carefully, as though every word truly mattered. Or perhaps it was his calm presence, which didn't demand or command attention like many wealthy customers did. Instead, he was gentle, approachable, and seemed more interested in people than in possessions. Trying to fill the quiet, the employee spoke again, his voice softer this time. He explained how he had taken the job because it offered stability, even though his life outside the store was far from stable. He mentioned how his family lived in a small apartment across town, how his younger sister was still in school, and how most of his earnings went toward supporting them. He didn't usually share such details with strangers, but something about this man made him feel safe enough to do so. He admitted that sometimes, when he was alone after closing, he would look at the watches through the glass and imagine what it might feel like to own one. Not for the sake of showing it off, but simply because it would represent success, a small reward for years of hard work. Then he would remind himself that such dreams were far away, and he would put the thought aside. The man listened without interrupting, nodding slowly, his expression serious but kind. He seemed deeply moved by the employee's honesty. His face, though calm, revealed a hint of sadness, as if he was thinking about his own past, about struggles he too had known before the world recognized his name. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "You know, the value of a person is never measured by what they wear on their wrist or what they keep in their pocket. It's measured by how much heart they put into their work, how much kindness they show, and how much strength they have to keep going when life isn't easy." The employee blinked in surprise. Customers rarely said such things. They usually spoke about design, money, or fashion trends. But here was a man talking about values, about things deeper than the glittering surface. His words stayed in the young man's mind, echoing long after they were spoken. There was a pause as both of them looked at the watch again. The employee almost laughed, shaking his head. "It's strange, isn't it? I spend my days selling symbols of wealth, but in reality, I can barely pay my bills. Sometimes I feel like I'm living two lives, the one people see here, where I wear a suit and stand in a fancy store, and the one outside, where every coin counts. The man's expression shifted. His eyes softened even more, and his face carried the weight of someone who understood more than he let on. He leaned slightly closer and asked, almost in a whisper, "And how do you keep going?" The employee looked down, his hands clasped in front of him. "I keep going because of my family. My mother works long hours, and I want to take some of the burden off her. My sister dreams of becoming a teacher, and I want to make sure she has that chance. I tell myself that maybe, one day, life will be better. Until then, I keep moving forward." The man remained silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the young man's face. It was not pity in his gaze, but respect. Respect for someone who carried so much responsibility with quiet dignity. Respect for someone who could still smile and serve others even while carrying his own struggles. Slowly, the man's expression began to change. It was as if a realization had washed over him, a thought that reached deep inside his heart. His features softened further, but there was also a seriousness in his eyes. The employee did not understand it then, but it was the beginning of something that would soon transform the entire moment. Another customer walked past, glancing at the displays, but the two men hardly noticed. The world around them seemed distant, as if the store had become a quiet island where two different lives had unexpectedly met. One life filled with quiet struggle, the other with silent empathy. The employee, perhaps sensing the heaviness of the man's thoughts, tried to change the subject lightly. "Anyway, I'm sorry. I shouldn't talk about my problems to customers. It's just that, sometimes it slips out. I hope I didn't bore you." The man smiled gently, shaking his head. "No. You didn't bore me at all. In fact, you reminded me of something very important. Sometimes, people need to be reminded that behind every uniform, behind every polite smile, there is a human being with a story. And your story is worth hearing." The words struck the employee deeply. His chest tightened, and for a moment, he had no reply. He felt seen in a way he hadn't in a long time. To be acknowledged not just as an employee but as a person, it was rare, and it meant more than he could express. The man looked back at the watch once more, his face thoughtful, as if the glittering piece of metal had suddenly gained a new meaning. It was no longer just a luxury item, it had become a symbol of the gap between dreams and reality, between wealth and struggle, between those who could afford and those who could only admire. The employee waited quietly, wondering what the man was thinking. He could not know then that the man standing before him was already planning something unexpected, something that would soon leave him speechless. For now, all he saw was a customer lost in thought, his face carrying the look of someone who had just been reminded of the fragile beauty of human honesty. And in that silent moment, between the glittering lights and the quiet hum of the store, two different worlds stood side by side, about to collide in a way that neither of them would ever forget. The man's silence seemed to stretch across the quiet store. His eyes lingered on the watch, but his mind was somewhere else. The employee felt unsure, wondering if he had said too much, shared more of his life than he should have. Usually, he kept conversations light, talking only about products, but this time had been different. There was something in this customer that made honesty come easily, as if he had known him for longer than just a few minutes. Finally, the man turned to him again, his expression soft but filled with something unspoken. He asked a simple question, one that felt heavier than its words. "What would owning something like this mean to you?" The employee blinked, caught off guard. He hesitated, his hands tightening behind his back. No customer had ever asked him that before. Most people came in to talk about features, styles, or price. Never about meaning. He thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "It would mean that hard work doesn't always go unnoticed," he admitted quietly. "That even if I don't have much, one day, dreams can come true. But honestly," he added with a small smile, "I don't think I'll ever hold something like this in my hands. For me, it's enough to admire it and to help others find joy in owning it. That's my reality. The man's face shifted again. His eyes softened even more, almost as if he carried a sadness of his own. He did not speak right away, but instead looked back at the watch as though weighing the young man's words against something in his own heart. For Keanu Reeves, this was not just another casual encounter. He had always lived with a quiet awareness of the struggles ordinary people faced. He remembered his own hardships, the times when life had been unkind, when money had been scarce, and when he had felt the weight of loneliness. Fame and fortune had come later, but those earlier years had shaped him into the man he was now, a man who never forgot what it meant to go without. So as he listened to the employee's quiet honesty, something stirred inside him. He saw not just a worker in a luxury store, but a person carrying responsibility far bigger than himself. He saw someone trying to balance duty, hope, and quiet sacrifice, someone who gave more than he took. And that realization left a mark on him. The employee, unaware of the thoughts running through the man's mind, continued his duties, pointing out small details of the watch's craftsmanship, describing how it was made by hand and why collectors cherished it. But even as he spoke, he felt a strange heaviness in the air, as though something important was about to happen. The man listened patiently, nodding, but his gaze never left the employee for long. He asked softly, "And what about your dreams? Beyond work, beyond responsibility? What do you dream of for yourself?" The question made the employee pause. He swallowed hard, unsure if he should answer truthfully. But then, remembering how kind the man had been, he decided not to hide. "I dream of building a life where my family doesn't have to struggle. Where my sister can study without worry, and where my mother doesn't come home every night exhausted. And maybe," he hesitated, then smiled faintly, "maybe one day I'll be able to travel, see the world, and live without counting every coin. That's what I dream of." The man's lips curved into the faintest smile, though his eyes carried a weight of empathy. He nodded slowly, as if those words had touched something deep within him. Just then, another staff member passed by, offering the man a polite greeting, clearly recognizing him now. But the man quietly placed a finger to his lips, signaling not to reveal his identity. He wanted this moment to remain pure, free from the influence of fame. He wanted to stay simply as a man listening to another man's truth. The employee did not notice this exchange. He continued speaking softly, unaware of who exactly stood before him. In his mind, this was just a thoughtful customer who listened more deeply than most. The man then leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. "You know," he said, "life has a way of surprising us. Sometimes, the things we think are out of reach find their way into our lives in ways we could never imagine. Sometimes, kindness comes back to us when we least expect it." The employee tilted his head, curious, but he brushed the comment aside, thinking it was just a kind phrase meant to comfort him. He smiled politely, though deep down, he wondered what the man truly meant. The air in the store felt different now, as if charged with quiet energy. The employee sensed that the man was not like other customers. He carried himself with humility, yes, but also with a depth that most people never revealed. It was as though he had lived many lives, each one teaching him something about struggle, compassion, and resilience. The employee's words earlier about not being able to afford the very things he sold had struck a chord in the man. His face revealed it now. His jaw was set, but his eyes were gentle, glowing with a light that came only from true empathy. The employee didn't realize it yet, but something inside the man had shifted. He had gone from being a curious customer to someone silently moved by the truth he had just heard. The story of one hard-working employee had reminded him of the countless others around the world who faced the same daily struggles, who gave so much yet received so little. The moment felt heavy with meaning. The employee adjusted his tie nervously, sensing that the man's silence carried more weight than words ever could. He tried to lighten the mood again, joking softly, "Anyway, you probably didn't come here to hear my life story. You came to see watches, and I'm here talking about dreams." But the man shook his head, his voice calm and steady. "Sometimes, dreams are more important than watches. Because watches only tell time. Dreams give us a reason to keep moving through it." The employee froze, his chest tightening. The words were so unexpected, so profound, that he didn't know how to reply. He only managed a small nod, feeling something stir within him. The man's face, however, had completely changed now. It no longer carried the casual curiosity of a customer browsing a store. Instead, it reflected a quiet decision forming deep inside him. His eyes glimmered with determination, the kind that only comes when someone has chosen to act from the heart. The man stood in silence for a moment longer, his thoughtful gaze locked on the watch inside the glass case. The employee shifted slightly, unsure of what the man was thinking, but respectful enough to give him space. In his heart, the young worker believed that this customer was simply deciding whether or not to purchase the piece, as so many others had done before. What he did not know was that something very different was taking shape in the man's mind. With calm steps, the man finally turned to the employee and said softly, "I'd like to see that watch, please." The employee nodded quickly, almost relieved to have something practical to do. He pulled out a key, unlocked the display, and carefully lifted the watch from its cushion. He placed it gently on a soft cloth on the counter, then stepped aside, letting the man take a closer look. The man lifted the watch slowly, almost reverently. He studied its details, the weight in his hand, the shine of the silver, the delicate motion of the hands ticking in rhythm. But even as he examined it, his mind was elsewhere. To him, this watch was no longer just a luxury item. It had become something far more meaningful, the bridge between two very different lives that had crossed paths that day. The employee spoke, explaining the features with the professionalism he had been trained to use. "It's made by hand, sir. Every part has been carefully crafted. The design is one of a kind. Collectors all over the world admire pieces like this." His voice was steady, but deep down, he felt the sting of his earlier confession. He had said openly that he could never afford such a piece, and now here it was, in his hands, only because of the customer before him. The man nodded slowly, listening. Then, without hesitation, he looked up and said, "I'll take it." The employee blinked, his breath catching for a moment. The words sounded ordinary, but the ease with which the man said them made the employee realize he might not be just another customer. Still, he kept his composure, giving a polite smile. "Of course, sir. I'll prepare the paperwork." He moved quickly, gathering the documents, checking the details, and making sure everything was done correctly. He had seen customers purchase expensive watches before, but this felt different. Something in the man's calm, steady voice made it clear that the decision was not made lightly. Once everything was ready, the man reached for his payment method, completing the purchase with quiet ease. There was no show, no arrogance, no sign of pride. He handled the transaction as though he were buying something ordinary, even though the amount could have bought a small car. The employee placed the watch carefully back into its box, wrapping it with precision, ensuring every detail was perfect. He closed the lid, tied the ribbon, and slid the elegant bag across the counter. "Here you go, sir. Thank you for your purchase." The man did not take the bag right away. Instead, he looked at the employee with a soft smile that seemed to carry a secret. For a moment, the young worker was puzzled. Then, slowly, the man pushed the bag back across the counter, toward him. The employee froze, his eyes darting from the bag to the man's face, uncertain what was happening. "Sir," he whispered. The man's voice was calm but firm, filled with warmth. "This is for you." The words hung in the air, heavier than anything the employee had ever heard. He blinked rapidly, Sure he had misheard. For me? The man nodded. Yes. You said you could never afford it? But you deserve it. It belongs to you now. The employee's heart raced, his mind spinning. He shook his head quickly, stepping back in disbelief. No, sir, I can't, this is too much. I can't accept something like this. His hands trembled as he tried to push the bag back toward the customer. But the man gently placed his hand over the bag, stopping him. His voice was steady, yet filled with kindness. You can. And you will. Sometimes, life gives us gifts we never expect. Today, this is yours. The employee felt his throat tighten, his eyes burning as tears threatened to fall. He had never in his life experienced such generosity. Customers came and went every day, some treating him kindly, others ignoring him, but never had anyone looked at him and seen him as more than just an employee behind a counter. For a long moment, he could not speak. His chest rose and fell quickly, his breath shallow as emotions rushed through him. Finally, his voice broke as he whispered, I don't know what to say. Thank you so much. The man gave a small nod, his expression calm but filled with compassion. You don't need to say anything. Just remember that you're worth more than you think. Don't ever forget that. By now, a few other staff members had noticed the unusual scene. They stood at a distance, watching quietly, their own eyes wide with surprise. Some of them had realized who the customer was, though the employee still had no idea he was speaking to Keanu Reeves. To him, this was just an extraordinary act of kindness from a stranger who had chosen to listen, to care, and to give without asking for anything in return. The store was silent except for the quiet ticking of the display clocks on the walls. The air felt charged, heavy with emotion. The employee held the bag close, his hands still trembling. For him, it was not just a watch inside. It was hope, it was recognition, it was proof that even in a world where people often overlook the struggles of others, there were still those who cared. He finally lifted his eyes to meet the man's gaze. In that look, he saw not a wealthy customer, not someone distant, but a human being who understood. He felt tears slide down his cheeks, but for once, he did not try to hide them. The man offered a gentle smile, as though encouraging him to accept not just the gift, but also the meaning behind it. Then, with quiet grace, he stepped back, giving the employee space to gather his emotions. The employee could hardly believe what had happened. His mind replayed the entire conversation, from the moment he had admitted that he could never afford the watch, to the moment the man had placed it in his hands. It felt unreal, like a dream. And yet, the weight of the bag in his grasp told him it was real. The man adjusted his jacket, preparing to leave. Before he stepped away, he looked at the employee one last time and said softly, "Take care of your family. Keep dreaming. The world needs people like you." And with that, he turned and walked toward the door. The employee stood frozen, his heart full, his tears still fresh. Around him, the other staff members whispered, some already moved to tears themselves. The quiet store, usually filled with polite transactions and rehearsed smiles, had just witnessed something unforgettable. For the young man, it was a moment that would remain etched in his heart forever. He had walked into work that day believing it would be just another ordinary shift, another day of showing customers treasures he could never own. But now, holding the bag close to his chest, he realized that life could change in a single moment, in the kindness of a stranger who saw more than just an employee in a uniform. The young employee stood frozen behind the counter, the bag still in his trembling hands. His chest rose and fell quickly as though he had just run a long distance, but in truth, he had barely moved. His mind kept repeating the same thought: was this real? Could such a thing truly have just happened to him? In all his life, he had never expected kindness in such a form, never imagined that someone would look at him, listen to him, and decide to change his day, no, his life with such a powerful gesture. The store was unusually quiet. Customers who had been browsing stood off to the side, whispering to each other. The other staff members exchanged looks, each of them surprised, moved, and humbled by what they had witnessed. None of them had ever seen anything like it. In a place where money and luxury usually spoke louder than humanity, this moment felt like a spark of something far greater. The employee's eyes were still wet when he looked down at the bag again. Inside was the watch, the same piece he had admired so many times through the glass but never thought he would touch, let alone own. His throat tightened, and he whispered almost to himself, "Why me? Why would he do this for me?" One of his colleagues stepped closer, eyes wide, voice hushed. "Do you know who that was?" The young man shook his head slowly, still dazed. "That was Keanu Reeves," the colleague said softly, almost reverently. "The actor. The man who just gave you that watch is a world-famous star." The employee's head snapped up, his eyes widening in disbelief. His mind rushed to connect the pieces: the humble clothes, the kind smile, the deep empathy in his voice. He had heard stories about Keanu Reeves before, stories of how he lived simply, helped strangers, and treated people with respect. But he had never imagined meeting him in person, much less receiving such a gift from him. His knees weakened, and he leaned against the counter for support. He whispered again, "Keanu Reeves?" The name sounded almost unreal in his mouth. The colleague nodded firmly. "Yes. And what he just did for you is exactly the kind of thing people say he does. Quietly. Without cameras. Without attention. Just kindness." The employee's heart swelled with emotion. He had spoken honestly to a stranger, not knowing who he was, and in return, that stranger had given him something he could never have dreamed of. More than the watch, it was the gesture, the recognition, the respect, the reminder that his struggles and dreams mattered. He carefully opened the bag, lifting the box inside. His hands trembled as he placed it on the counter and slowly opened the lid. The watch gleamed under the store lights, more beautiful than ever before. But now, when he looked at it, he did not see just silver and glass. He saw a story. He saw hope. He saw the moment a man chose to listen and give. A tear slid down his cheek as he whispered, "This isn't just a watch. This is a memory I'll carry for the rest of my life." That evening, when his shift ended, he walked home with the bag clutched carefully to his chest. The city lights glowed around him, cars passed by, and people rushed in every direction, but to him, the world felt different now. He had always walked these streets with the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. Tonight, he walked with something else: gratitude, wonder, and a quiet belief that miracles were still possible. When he reached home, his mother looked up from the small kitchen table where she was sorting bills. His younger sister sat beside her, finishing her homework. Both of them immediately noticed the unusual look on his face, a mix of shock, joy, and disbelief. His mother frowned gently, concerned. "What happened? Are you all right?" He nodded quickly, smiling through his tears. "I'm more than all right, Mama. Something happened today, something I'll never forget." He placed the bag on the table, carefully lifting out the box. His sister gasped as the watch gleamed under the dim kitchen light, more dazzling than anything they had ever seen. His mother's hand flew to her mouth. "Where did you get this? Don't tell me you bought it." "No," he interrupted softly, shaking his head. "I didn't buy it. Someone gave it to me." His mother and sister exchanged puzzled glances. "Gave it to you? Who?" He sat down, still struggling to put the day into words. "A customer came into the store today. We talked. I told him how I could never afford the things I sell, how I work hard but still struggle. I didn't know who he was. I thought he was just another man. But it was Keanu Reeves? And he bought this watch. For me. His sister's eyes widened, her mouth falling open in shock. The movie star? The one in all those films. He nodded slowly, his voice breaking as he spoke. Yes. Him. He listened to me. He saw me. And then, he gave me this. His mother's eyes filled with tears, her hand reaching across the table to squeeze his. My son, she whispered, her voice trembling. Do you see? Do you see how your honesty and kindness touch people? Even someone like him saw your heart. The young man lowered his gaze, overcome with emotion. For so long, he had carried his burdens quietly, believing the world rarely noticed people like him. But today, in the middle of an ordinary shift, someone had not only noticed but also reached out in a way that changed everything. That night, as he lay in bed, the watch resting safely in its box beside him, he thought about all that had happened. He replayed the conversation, the gentle way the man had listened, the wisdom in his words, the moment he slid the bag back across the counter. Every detail burned brightly in his memory. He realized then that the watch itself was not the true gift. The real gift was the reminder that kindness existed in the world, that people could choose compassion over indifference, generosity over pride. It was a lesson he would carry with him far beyond the glitter of the timepiece. In the days that followed, word of the story spread quietly. Some customers who came into the store mentioned it with admiration. Friends and neighbors who heard were inspired. But through it all, the employee remained humble. When people asked him how it felt to receive such a gift, he always gave the same answer. It wasn't about the watch. It was about being seen. It was about kindness. And every time he wore it, every time he felt its weight on his wrist, he remembered that moment. Not as a symbol of wealth, but as a symbol of humanity. A reminder that even in a world where people often hurried past each other without looking, one simple act could remind someone of their worth. For Keanu Reeves, it had been just another quiet decision, one of many acts of kindness he gave without seeking recognition. For the young employee, it became a turning point, a story he would one day tell his children, his grandchildren, about the day a stranger walked into his store and changed the way he saw himself and the world. And so, the watch ticked on, marking the hours and minutes, but carrying far more than time within its frame. It carried a story of compassion, humility, and the unforgettable moment when one man's simple act of generosity lit up another man's entire life.